Thursday will mark 1 year since the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. New CBS News polling finds that 68% of Americans view the events of that day as a sign of increasing political violence in the country, while 32% see it as an isolated incident. During an interview on CBS's Face the Nation yesterday, Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney called out former President Donald Trump for not trying to stop the attack.
He could have simply walked a few feet to the White House briefing room. He could have gone immediately on live television and asked his supporters to stop what was happening, asked them to go home. He failed to do that.
So, for more on this, I want to bring in Kris Van Cleave, who is on Capitol Hill. So, Kris, over the weekend, we heard a lot from members of this House committee. Congressman Benny Thompson, who chairs the House committee, said in an interview yesterday that the panel has evidence of interactions between House members and rioters on January 6th, but that it is not necessarily of a significant nature. So it is curious. What do we know about these interactions?
Yeah, so far what Chairman Thompson was saying is that they have evidence that members of Congress may have posed for photos with some of the rioters in the week leading up to the attack on the Capitol or at the Stop the Steal rally that morning, that some of the rioters may have been in some of the members' offices or inside the Capitol grounds before the attack on the Capitol. But what there doesn't appear to be evidence at this point is of members giving tours of the Capitol. Some of the allegations that were levied against some members of Congress about helping some of these rioters prepare. Doesn't look like they have that evidence, but there certainly were signs, Thompson says, that some members of Congress did interact with some of the people who would ultimately storm the Capitol.
Congresswoman Liz Cheney also talking this weekend. She did an interview with ABC's This Week yesterday, and she said that the committee has, quote, firsthand testimony that Ivanka Trump asked her father, former President Donald Trump, to take action during the Capitol riot, at least a couple of times. What do we know about this?
Sure. We know based on what Congresswoman Cheney said that at least twice Ivanka Trump went to her father, then President Trump, asking him to do something to stop the violence. And this we'd also heard in the Robert Woodward book as well. So this is confirmation that Ivanka Trump made efforts to try to get her dad to act here. We also heard from Vice Chair Cheney on Face the Nation, where she was saying that they have evidence, they have heard direct testimony that former President Trump was in the White House, was watching what was going on, but still there was more than a 2-hour, almost 3-hour gap between when things began and when he made his statement telling people to go home. And Ms. Cheney has made the point that that was a dereliction of duty, were her words.
So we know the committee has been trying to get its hands on various documents, records from the Trump administration. The former administration, I guess, has been resistant. Where do things stand?
Well, it's going to go to the Supreme Court. The appellate court before Christmas ruled in favor of the committee getting the documents. That's been appealed to the Supreme Court, and ultimately that's where kind of everybody thought this would end up, with that the Supreme Court would have to decide if former President Trump's claims of executive privilege outweigh the fact that the sitting President Joe Biden has waived executive privilege, which would then clear the way for these documents to be handed over to the January 6th committee. They expected that there would be a legal battle, and now they're going through the motions of that legal fight.
Earlier in the show, we reported that the Capitol Police Chief said that the force is severely understaffed. He said to the tune of about 400 officers, and he partially blamed the attack on the Capitol. You spoke to him. What did he say about the threats against lawmakers now, a year after this attack, and the staffing issues and what he thinks is at the heart of them?
Sure. So for the staffing issues, the Capitol Police have seen their responsibilities and where their focuses need to be grow, which means their staffing needs to grow. They have seen an increased number of officers compared to a normal year depart the agency since January 6th. And they do plan to hire about 200, 280 officers over the next year is their goal. But they say they need about 400 to make up to fill their staffing needs, and that has slowed the ability to increase training, to retrain officers because they can't pull police officers off the line, so to speak, to put them into training. They're hoping as they get these hundreds of new officers working and trained and on the job that will ease their staffing crunch. We talked to Chief Manger about the threat level, and he said it's essentially never been higher. That, I think a lot of people thought January 6th might be this tipping point where the rhetoric would ramp down, and a lot of people may feel like the political temperature in the country has come down some, but the threat landscape, particularly directed to lawmakers, has only continued to rise. They've seen a substantial increase in the number of threats made against members of Congress in the last year, and it's an exponential growth almost since 2017. Over the last 5 years, something around 250% increase in the number of threats against members of Congress. So he remains very concerned about that. And what he told us was, until as a country we say enough is enough, he's worried that this continues to grow. And we're going to hear a lot more from Chief Manger in our interview over the next several days. But he has real concerns about where this all leads, as you can imagine, as the man who bears the responsibility of securing not only the Capitol, but protecting 535 members of Congress.
Mm-hmm. And you would think that perhaps the temperature had gone down a little, but it appears that it hasn't when you talk about the number of threats. And speaking of that, CBS News has a new poll out, sort of taking the temperature of Americans 1 year since this January 6th attack. And, I'm going to lean into another cliche, Chris. Perception is reality. So I find this very interesting, the way Americans perceived what happened on that day. The poll found that 85% of Democrats call the January 6th violence an insurrection, while 47% of Republicans call it patriotism. And 56% of Republicans say participants were defending freedom. What does this show us about where, Americans lie when it comes to, what happened that day, where the two parties are right now in regards to what happened that day? I find this sort of really shocking that there are still two starkly different realities.
There really are, and that's been cemented over the last year in where people get their information. You have outlets that tell a very different story than the one that I saw on January 6th. I was here outside the west front of the Capitol, and the experience that I had there doesn't always seem to be mirrored by what you hear from some people who call this patriotism or a right to protest. There certainly were people that were there protesting, but that's grossly overshadowed by the storming of the Capitol, the hours of almost hand-to-hand combat that you saw between some of the people there and the police. I mean, you had rioters attacking the Capitol. End of thought, period. Were there people there that didn't do that? Yes. But it doesn't excuse the fact that what you saw was a violent attack on this building, on the Capitol, on the police officers, with the intent of disrupting constitutionally mandated steps in certifying an election. And you look at even the divide over who was here that day. You see 41% of Republicans and 21% of people overall in this poll said that they were liberal-leaning groups. And that just doesn't bear out with our experience on the ground that day at all.
That is stunning. I know we're going to be talking more about this, particularly as the House committee starts to reveal even more about the evidence that they've collected. Kris, thank you so much.
Sure thing.